to show you that piece today. Now it's time to move to the panel discussion. We're going to hear some of the talk or hear a summary of some of what was going on in the breakout rooms. And we also, of course, want to hear your views, share your comments and your experience and your questions put to our panel. Our panel will comprise Mel Pritchard, Paul Sullivan and Lauren Cadet de Fontenay, and is chaired by Roger Firman. Roger is currently chair of the UK Association for Accessible Formats, that's UCAF. He's had a lifetime of using Braille both personally and professionally. From 2004 to mid-2022, he ran his own business called Golden Chord, transcribing music into Braille for a range of customers. Prior to that, he worked at RNIB from 1982 to 2004. In a variety of posts, but music was a central area during that time as well. And Roger's hobbies include baking, drinking nice wine, reading, and traveling. So Roger has been a great friend, a great colleague, and we're absolutely delighted, Roger, that you've joined us today to chair the panel discussion. So I will hand over to you to bring us to this next stage of the conference. Do we have Roger?
Just looking for
Roger. I'm just trying to unmute Roger now. Roger, can you hear us?
Oh yeah, there.
There you go. You're there.
Right. I didn't realise. Sorry, I was muted. I didn't realise I was. Anyway, thank you very much for the introduction, Stuart. Very kind of you. As we reach the final session of this event, I should like to welcome our panel members, and Stuart's already mentioned who they will be, but all of the co-leaders or co-hosts of these groups. We have George, Mel, Laurent, and Paul, Matthew, and Stuart himself will be contributing, I'm sure, along the way. But of course, we are most keen to hear from you, our audience, too. So as previously, do please post your comments and questions in the chat, or as you know, do raise your hand and we can bring you in that way. So to begin, I think it would be really helpful to get the headlines from the various groups out on the table, as it were, so we have an idea of the range of topics and we can go into more detail with the panel and with yourselves. But do keep your questions coming into us, because they're going to be key to this session. And I'm wondering whether George and Paul, whether you would like to get us underway by sharing what happened in the group you were leading, the main headlines. So is George?
I've just unmuted Paul. Paul should be.
Okay.
So Paul, you're unmuted. And
I suppose the main outcome for our group was that there's a general consensus that Braille definitely does enable people to carry on with the activities they enjoy doing, to socialize with other people, to be included in group activities such as choirs and families playing games together, etc., etc. But I suppose one of the things that consistently came up in the questions and in discussions about how you adapt and use Braille for adapting social activities, leisure activities, is about labelling, and the power of being able to label games and food packaging and lift buttons and so on. That means you can move around in the environment and take part in those kind of leisure activities. So yes, it's very much about that. Anything else that you can think of, George, that struck you? I don't know if George is hearing me. Apparently not. Is anybody hearing me?
Yes, we can. I can hear you, Paul.
Fantastic. Right, yes. It's hard to know sometimes on Zoom.
No, I know. Is George able to be with us, Stuart? Do you know?
I'm just trying to look for George, actually, Roger. Apologies.
No.
I don't see her.
I have George here.
Oh,
Sharon
has George.
There we go.
I've just unmuted.
Hey,
I'm here.
Right.
You missed a really eloquent conversation I just had, but no. I think kind of also, you know, maybe finding your own adaptions or talking to other people about their kind of DIY things. Like we had a nice discussion about Braille slates and how you can use them, and you know, it was really interesting. And that kind of inclusion, you know, we spoke to some people who'd also kind of set up their own little social groups. I think there was some gambling card game being played, which was really interesting, and kind of, you know, those kind of little communities that you can set up by people, you know, you find those people who know Braille, and you can create that kind of small community, and the kind of inclusion you can create with people who maybe don't use Braille, but it's, you know, I think
the other thing, Roger, sorry, George, one of the other really important messages that came out, I think, was that you don't need much Braille to get going in social activities like card games and labelling, etc. You know, you can start with simply knowing the alphabet and a few letters, and then build on that. So, you know, you don't have to be as fluent as Peter White or somebody like myself who's been reading Braille for years. You know, you can start small and then find in the environment through sort of tactile signage, lift buttons, medicines that have been labelled and so on, opportunities to practice and build up your Braille skills.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and actually keeping fluent in it by doing these kinds of things and making it kind of accessible to people who may be a bit cautious about Braille and not sure whether they want to learn it, and whether you just go, come play a game and we'll be fine, you know, or look, it's right in front of you, it's in the lift, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a word that didn't come up much, but it's a really important word, I think, and that is fun. Braille enables you to have fun. You can play games together, you can join in choirs, or you can do cooking, you know, you follow instructions, and you can do the fun things you've always enjoyed doing if you've become visually impaired, and if you are a lifelong visually impaired person. You know, Braille has enabled me to have fun all my life by enabling me to participate in things that I wouldn't be able to do ordinarily using audio or speech. And again, we're not decrying those things. They are fantastic tools as well. But Braille is just one extra tool in the toolbox.
Lovely. We'll clearly come back to you later on. Just keen to now hear, if we may, from Mel and Matthew. I don't know who is going to lead. Is it going to be Mel?
I've just unmuted you, Mel.
Oh, wonderful. That's thank you very, very much. Yeah, well, we looked at, we realised that, you know, different parts of the country have different ideas in schools about who should learn Braille, I'm sure. But we looked at who should learn in a perfect world, who needs to learn, and why it's so important to learn Braille. And we also looked, we did think about fun, you see, because we were talking about youngsters and school. And so we thought about learning Braille being fun and using Lego bricks and building up your tactile skills, or your finger sensitivity and your fine motor skills. So we talked about having fun with cooking and Play-Doh and Lego and all sorts of things like that. So we sort of split our workshop into those three categories, or three sections. And I think what came out, I'm sure Matthew will correct me on some of this because it's probably an hour ago and I've forgotten. But one of the things I think that came across as a concern was, how do we make Braille interesting? How do we make it cool? How do we make it How do we make not only the children feel they want to learn it, but how do we make those parents keen for their children to learn it? And I think that was something that came out as maybe a concern, which we tried to address as best we can. Matthew, what did I miss?
Well, I don't think you really missed anything, to be honest. That's a very good, very good summary of what we covered. There was a lot of questions in the chat, interestingly, about reading schemes. We didn't do an awful lot of coverage of reading schemes in the session because the reading scheme landscape is in a very interesting place at the moment. And I think there's probably a lot more work that needs to be done on reading schemes by professionals and by academics, VUE and University of Birmingham and things like that. But there definitely is an interest in, okay, we can teach people Braille, that's fine, but then how do we encourage them to read? What do we give them to read for pleasure that is going to be engaging in the 21st century and that also aligns nicely with the 21st century school curriculum? And we've definitely identified a gap in the market there.
Brilliant. So those are the main headlines coming out of your group. Really interesting material there. And so let's finally, Laurent and Stuart. Is Laurent, are you?
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to start us off, and then Stuart, if I miss anything, then please do fill in. So a few of the main themes that came out from our session was the invaluable contribution that Braille makes when it comes to accessing STEM subjects, whether it's in education or in the professional setting. So STEM stands for science, technology, something else, and maths. So Braille is really helpful in those terms. We also spoke about the importance of Braille when it comes to accessing materials in different languages, the value that it has in terms of note taking, and revisiting one's notes afterwards. One of the problem areas that we identified was the timely provision of Braille at university, where one of the participants could contrast her experience of studies in New Zealand, where she did experience very timely provision of her Braille study materials, but then coming to the UK and experiencing quite the opposite and having to rely on volunteers to read books to her on tape, which was very helpful, but not her preferred medium for study. We then spoke a bit about future developments and about the development of an electronic Braille format, which will be very helpful, to make Braille, especially on refreshable Braille displays, much more consumable, much more useful. And James told us about the acronym GRIN, which James, you might need to add on a little bit, but it stands for graphics, the ability to mix graphics in with text on certain Braille displays which are under development, reflow, which is being able to sort of change the line lengths depending on the length of the actual Braille display. Something else which I stands for, and then navigation, which is the ability to jump around in a BRF file with ease, as one can currently do. And this is something that's being developed by the DAISY Consortium. So if you're interested, do look it up. So yeah, Stuart, anything from your side that you'd like to add?
I think you've covered everything perfectly, Laurent. I suppose just one thing that came up at the very end, I think somebody was making the point in our room about cost of Braille technology. And I suppose, look, everyone talks about cost of and the changes that are coming maybe in the future in Braille technology that will help bring the cost down. And somebody was saying that, they had a Braille display, I think now for work, but, it's difficult to get access to this technology before you're either working or in college. To really know how to use it, so you're kind of trying to trying to learn on the fly, maybe. So I think just the whole point about cost was brought up.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that really, you know, these developments in terms of costs lowering, in terms of, you know, innovation, in terms of how materials are created for storage and display on Braille displays, you know, to me that really just goes to show that Braille is alive and kicking. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's been really, really helpful. And I'm wondering if during that time we have any questions that have been put in the chat or any raised hands. Fionnuala or I don't mind who's looking after that.
I know there's lots of queries in the chat, Roger. Just sorry, the little bits and I probably haven't seen them all, but there was people asking about, you know, how they could learn Braille. Somebody was asking about Braille music, and I see that Kate Risden has popped into the chat and said that she's a Braille music teacher, which is great to see all this collaboration happening in the background as we're all chatting here.
Yeah, there's lots. Sorry, Stuart, I was on mute there when I started talking.
All right,
yeah, lots of questions. I suppose a couple of questions about refreshing Braille rather than starting from scratch. And is that something that the Braille for Beginners course is suitable for as well?
Who'd like to deal with that one?
Mel, maybe?
Yeah. Is Mel on mute?
We have Mel. We did have Mel.
We did.
Can't unmute.
Yes,
you're there. You're there.
I'm there.
You're there.
That was my fault because I muted myself to have a good cough and then I couldn't get back again. Yeah, Braille for Beginners is a really good way of either starting from scratch or if you haven't done Braille for a while, sort of refreshing your skills. It is specifically for people learning Braille by touch. I think it's important to say that. It's not designed for people learning visually. There are lots of other courses out there for visual Braille learners. So when we did the Braille for Beginners, we were really looking at people who can't see well enough to access the other courses and people who want to learn by touch. It is only the basic alphabet. So we just cover in Braille for Beginners the alphabet, basic punctuation and numbers, but we've tried to do it in such a way that if someone then did want to go on to grade 2 Braille, they'd be in a good place to pick up with something like, say, the fingerprint reading and writing Braille course. So that's how we designed it.
Brilliant. Mel, thank you very much. I think it is really a theme that's coming through loud and clear this morning, is that you start and do what you're able to do. You start taking little steps and building on that. That helps encouragement, and you develop confidence and many other skills along the way. So it's a great way. So it's fantastic. Any other questions you can point us to?
I've got a couple of people who've raised their hands. Roger, if you'd like me to bring one or two in.
Yeah, by all means, Stuart. Who do we have?
Okay, so we're going to start with Dorothy, and then we're going to go to John Morris. So Dorothy, you're first.
Dorothy, welcome. What would you like to?
Hi, everyone. It's been a really good meeting, but I would like to know how the banks have made the notes with these G's. It has no registration to what the note is. What does 3 G's mean and all the rest of it? How on earth have they sorted that out?
Can I just, are you thinking of, you're thinking of the symbols on the £10 note and the £20 note, I think, aren't you?
Yes.
The two G's on the 10 and 3 G's. I think that goes way, well, I say way back, it goes back to, I think, when someone will be able to correct me, I think from RNIB, no doubt, because I believe I have a memory this was taken forward by RNIB in conjunction with those providing the notes, and there was certainly discussion about that at the time, and the idea was to get at least some markings on those notes.
doing
Yeah,
it.
Roger, I
Yeah.
wonder if I could
Matthew,
come in on
Matthew,
that.
yes, of course.
So, I think that's right. I wasn't involved in the creation of the banknotes, so I can't give you a first-hand answer. I can give you a second-hand answer, which I hope is good enough. The point was first of all that the letter G is quite easy to make on a note. It's just a cluster of 4 dots. The way in which it actually works is that there's 2 clusters of dots on the 10 and 3 on the 20, and that's what the significance is. I think originally they wanted to put 1 on the 5, but they didn't get the printing sorted out in time, but that's how it would go: 1 on the 5, 2 on the 10, 3 on the 20, and 4, if you're very lucky, on the 50. The reason why they chose G's instead of numbers, apart from the printing problems, actually the fact that it's a letter G is irrelevant. It's actually counting the clusters of dots that's the more relevant part, and what that does is, obviously, a Brailleist just has to get used to the fact that there's 2 G's on a £10 note. But even a non-Brailleist, even somebody who doesn't know Braille, because the letter G is quite a big shape, people would be able to count how many there were without necessarily needing to know any Braille. And so that was why they went for that rather than number. If you put, say, a number 10 or a number 20, the difference between the letter A and the letter B to someone with low tactile, skills would be quite difficult. And also, of course, the note might go flat over time. And so if the dot 2 of the B went flat, but the dot 1 didn't, then you'd think you've got a 10 when you've got a 20. Okay. So the reasons along those lines were why you had 3 G's on a 20 instead of the number 20.
And I think if anybody is really finding that a bit tricky, if it is possible for them, and I know this doesn't always work out by any stretch of imagination, but the notes do get larger in size from the 5 to the 10 to the 20. So maybe that could be another way if somebody needed some additional guidance as to which note they might have.
I'm going to take a slightly different angle on this question as well, Roger.
Yes, Paul. Yeah.
In our group, we vaguely touched on the idea that you occasionally meet dots in the environment that are not Braille, but are called Braille. So people think that a tactile watch is a Braille watch because it's got dots to indicate the time positions. And I suspect that these dots on these tactile markings on the plastic banknotes are the same. You know, they're taken to be Braille when really they're not Braille. They're just tactile indications of the denomination of the. But again, our question has raised a really good point that there's some confusion about this, and I suppose it's a bit like the tactile markings you find on pavements or platform edges. You know, unless somebody tells you the code, how are you expected to understand and interpret it correctly? And you do find dots placed on all sorts of things that are not Braille, but the public who think Braille is any pattern of dots. You know, I've heard people talk about the tactile paving as the Braille paving because it's got raised dots, by the crossing.
Yes.
I suspect it's something we've got to live with. But the good thing about Braille on banknotes, again, it's another opportunity if you're learning Braille, even though it's not real Braille, it's just, as Matthew says, a cluster of dots. It's another opportunity to rub your fingers across it and get used to identifying that tactilely, if that's a word, by touch.
Yeah.
Developing your touch skills.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, very much. Stuart, there was another raised hand, I believe.
Yes, there are actually a few now, Roger.
Okay.
So, we have John Morris, then we'll go to Evangelos, Marie Harrower, and Ian Lackey. So all people are waiting patiently, and thank you for your patience. Please bear with us and we'll get to you all. So, John, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, John, what?
Hi, Stuart, yeah.
How are you?
Thanks for this. It's really given me the spur to actually start learning Braille, even at my advanced age of 66 nearly. But you're talking about books, and there seem to be a dearth of books around for in Braille. How would I go about getting my books converted to Braille? Is there a charity that would do it, or do I do it through a publisher?
Who would like to take that one on the panel?
I'll take it. Just
Matthew,
sorry, give me a summary of the question again. Sorry, how do we encourage publishers to put more books into Braille?
No, how does it?
no,
See, I've got a couple of children's books I've had published normally, and I'd like to. Yeah, having listened to this, I think it'd be nice to try and get them into Braille versions. How would I do it?
Yes, I see. So there are two routes actually. As an author, and as a publisher, I mean, as an author, I suppose it depends what rights you've got, doesn't it? But I mean, you could commission, or the publisher could commission somebody to do the Braille for you, and that would be somebody like RNIB, or there's an organisation up in Wales called PIA, P-I-A. They do quite a lot of this sort of work, and there are other, independent transcribers. There's an organisation called UCAF, which Roger can talk to you more about, and UCAF would certainly be able to point you in the direction of reputable Braille transcribers, and the commission for that would have to come from the person who owns the copyright. So that would either be you as the author or your publisher. As a blind person, if you want a book in Braille that isn't available in Braille, there are various bits of copyright legislation which I won't go into here, partly because they're quite complicated and I don't know them all, and partly because it would take too long. But the cut and thrust of it is, if you want a book in Braille for your own private consumption and you're not going to make any money off it, and you own a copy of the book in some other way, so if you owned a print copy of the book, or you owned an electronic, an e-book or something, you would be within your rights to contact somebody like RNIB and say, could you make a transcription of this for my personal use? And they would be able to do that without copyright, so long as there was no sale of the book involved.
Yeah, I'm not looking to make a profit. It's just a case of, I'd like to get it out there, so the blind.
I think it's also worth saying, Matthew, that I'm a great fan of paper Braille. So books, proper old-fashioned Braille books, fantastic if you can get them. But of course, if you can get, if you've got Braille display, like I have, electronic Braille display, and that book is available, say, on Kindle or on Apple Books or whatever, then I can access that book for myself in Braille using my technology, rather than anybody else having to do anything with it.
Ah.
So if your books are available electronically, some people will be able to access them in Braille through modern technology, through Braille displays. Okay,
right, thanks.
So I think what I'd say about the question, thank you very much for raising it, and somehow can we make sure, either through this event or somehow, that if you need additional help or support or any further information, that you can, there is a way of you being able to get that. So, certainly, if we can help through UCAF, get in touch with us. Very happy to help, and there's lots of other help available. So really importantly, don't let it drop and be forgotten about if you need the additional support and help.
We have a couple of more raised hands, Roger,
yes,
if you're happy
please.
To continue with that.
Absolutely.
So Vangelis, I think Vangelis actually joined us in our breakout room, and I didn't pronounce his name correctly, and I think I've done it again. So my apologies. Vangelis, we should be able to talk to us now.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi there.
Yes, hi.
You can hear me, can you?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm not familiar with British currency notes, but I am with a Canadian. And briefly, the $5 bill has one 6-dot cell, and the 10 at some distance has two. The 23, the 54, and the $100 note has only two, but only the first and the fourth. And if you're lucky to get a $1,000 bill in Canada, it has no Braille cells. The thinking behind this technique is that we didn't use Braille numerals, because with a Braille cells, you don't need to interpret it. You just need to locate it and know how the method works. And our experience is that it's a very accessible and usable way of identifying notes, currency notes. The Canadian dollar does not have the Canadian currency does not have different sizes. So In fact, with this method, you don't have to compare a paper note to any other paper note. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the point you've raised. Very interesting indeed, and interesting to learn how other countries deal with a similar issue and come up with a different solution. So thank you very much for that. Stuart, there was another raised hand?
Absolutely. We have another one, Roger. So we have Marie Harrower. Marie, you should be able to chat to us.
Marie, welcome. What would you like to say?
Roger, thank you. And just kind of to take the opportunity of saying that the conference has been absolutely inspirational. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. We've, for the last 18 months, a small group of us have been campaigning to have Braille labels placed on food products. And today, the Scottish Parliament have opened a petition. And we hope that if the petition is well supported, then we might have a chance of legislation going through to ensure that manufacturers label products. The Co-op do it, and 1 or 2 other companies do it, and it's so easy to go open your cupboard and quickly and effortlessly identify the product that you wish to collect. And so, if anybody would be kind enough to support the petition in the Scottish Parliament, because this is going to be a national thing, although we've started it in the Scottish Parliament, you know, be assured that it's hopefully going to be national, then we would be most grateful for your support. And what you do is you Google #join the dots. Now, if I have any more information on how to access the petition, that's one way of doing it, but I think there will be other ways of doing it. May I circulate that to the Brailleist Foundation, and I wonder if they would be kind enough to circulate that to their the members. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the point. Yes, certainly something I am aware of that, and certainly want that to succeed, not only for Scotland, but obviously to increase labelling on many products. And as you mentioned, the Co-op do it, and obviously there are it's done on pharmaceutical products, but nowhere widely enough yet. So this is all good, and all power to the elbow, and taking the lead and pursuing it. That's fantastic. Now, we haven't heard, we've had a few raised hands, and I'm just wondering if there is anything in the chat that we need to respond to. Who's going?
Do we have anything in chat,
Vanilla
or Sharon, that you guys can see?
If we don't, then we can obviously go if there's any other question. Otherwise, I can
maybe while we're looking at the chat, Roger, we have one more raised hand.
Okay, by all means,
Ian Lackey. So, Ian, you should be able to chat to us.
Ian, welcome. What would you like to say or ask?
Hello. You can hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. A lot has been said about the cost of Braille displays, and for a long time, I used that as an argument for not getting one. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm in a position where I could afford to buy one myself. Mm-hmm. Having done that, it's something that I use every day.
Yeah.
I got my Brilliant that I'm using now last year. 2021. I've used it every day. So it really has paid for itself as a useful device. Also, I think it's worth mentioning the RNIV book card, which is the best free thing that you can get, in my opinion. And I think there's a new one coming out soon with more books on it. And thirdly, new book guide came out yesterday. And I was looking at the Braille books available in hard copy Braille. And I'm really wondering is it encouraging for people to get a book in Braille when it comes in something like 29 pamphlets or 12 pamphlets or whatever? I just wonder, has the uptake of hard copy Braille increased or decreased since the new system of giving people books in this format was brought into being?
I'm sure, many thanks for your question. I'm sure that some of what you said will really gladden the RNIB heart, and the heart of James Bowden in particular, who's done sterling work on providing, making it possible for all these books to be on the SD card. And but I'm wondering if Matthew or anybody else has some direct experience, or somebody in the audience would can help us directly to get a feel for the uptake of Braille since the Orbit Reader and other devices using. There will always be those who prefer hard copy Braille, and there is a difference, I think. I don't want to really get into the semantics of this, but there is a difference between reading a hard copy piece of Braille and something on a Braille display. But obviously both are equally valid, and not saying one's better than the other. They're just different experiences. But does anybody have any direct input?
I'm really asking, has there been any increase in the uptake of hard copy Braille since?
No, sure. Yes, I understand the helpful point you're making. I'm just wondering if there is anybody here who can give a definitive answer, or whether that's something we need to ascertain. And
I wouldn't be able to answer that question, Roger, but my feeling would be there would be a decrease rather than an increase, because for the points that the questioner makes, that, you know, the move to providing books in small pamphlets and therefore in even larger numbers than the old-fashioned Braille volumes used to come in, presents a lot of issues around handling, storage, packing, and disposal, and issues around the environment as well. For me, I think,
sure.
You know, and I've seen a lot of comments, you know, on other forums about people's feelings about these. So I think that is a question that does need answering. And I suppose more philosophically, you know, is there an intention somewhere to discourage Braille on paper, with the assumption that electronic Braille provides all we need? And I would strongly disagree with that. I love Braille paper.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it's the deliberate ploy saying, well, here is your electronic Braille, therefore hard copy Braille is. I mean, hard copy Braille is so important for people in many different situations, and you know, I'm sure probably every one of us at this meeting today could give a situation where there is a preference for hard copy Braille in their actual everyday life.
I'm with Peter White in lamenting the passing of the old National Library, but I do remember with some kind of horror and shock, really, the disgusting state of some of the books that used to come, you know, be delivered with all kinds of adhesions to them that you didn't want to ask too many questions about what they might be. You know, the new books are clean. You have to say that about them.
That's right. Stuart, thank you very much for the point, and that does need perhaps more of a definitive answer, unless somebody now has one.
Just
Matthew,
before we leave the point, hello, I don't have a definitive answer, but I have noticed that James Bowden has his hand up, and he may have a definitive answer. So I wonder if it's worth going to James before we move on.
Okay, James, do come in. Is James on mute?
Yeah, you should be able to hear us.
James, can you hear us?
Hello, yep.
Oh, great, welcome.
Hello. So this is a question, Ian and Paul, that you need to send to the RNIB library team. I don't have a definitive number if the numbers have gone up or down, but empirically, I think they have actually gone up. Now, it's really interesting, and I know there's a lot of mixed feeling about the new pamphlet style books, and we could spend an entire hour. In fact, I think we did spend an entire hour talking about them on one of the Braillist sessions. You've mentioned the cleanliness of the new books. That's definitely an advantage. You've also the freshness of the dots should also be another advantage. The smallness of the pamphlets. The original idea was to get them through letterboxes, but I know that sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't happen. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but I can definitely assure you there is no intention to force people into electronic only Braille. It's either or, it's your preference, and I think it's great that we have the choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100% support that, James. Thank you. So I think, and also very helpfully, thank you for directing the question, or suggesting where the question can be directed for, you know, more of a definitive answer on that point. But it is very much an either or situation. Before we get to the end of this session, I know there were two main themes that we're not going to solve them here by no means, but I just wondered whether anybody on the panel or anybody wishes to or can give us an update about provision of reading schemes. And the second point that I noted was provision of materials at university. I wonder if this has obviously been an issue and is an issue, so can we talk about those for the next perhaps few minutes? Anybody like to go on reading schemes? Are there new ones being developed? Is there are there existing ones that perhaps we don't know about, or as many people don't know about, who could benefit from them? Does anybody on the panel?
Well, I'll start the conversation.
Thank you.
And then we can hope that the conversation will sort of spread from there. Really, we didn't have a conclusive answer in our session, and this is probably because although Mel and I have both taught Braille to children, it was a long time ago, and so actually we're probably a little bit disconnected from that particular aspect of how schools work. What we seem to have come up with is that the reading schemes, the specific Braille reading schemes at the moment, are still the same as they were 20 years ago. So we're talking about Takeoff and the Abbey books and Braille for Infants that's now called Hands-On. However, one of the things that was highlighted was that you can learn Braille just by reading it. You don't have to be taught every single sign by a qualified Braille teacher. It's, of course, useful to have a qualified Braille teacher. And yes, I mean, weekly Braille lessons are useful to reinforce things and to reinforce things that you might have learned, you know, incorrectly by just seeing it. But if you see a sign and you don't know what it is, you're going to be inquisitive about it most likely and ask somebody what it is, or read around it to figure it out, or take a good educated guess. And on that basis, actually, certainly when I was at school, we used the Oxford Reading Tree. I don't know whether the Oxford Reading Tree is still in use today, but equivalent schemes will certainly exist and could be transcribed into Braille quite easily. And I wouldn't stress too much about learning tables or about using the right contractions in the right order or anything fancy like that. I'd just transcribe them in plain old grade 2 and wait and see what happens, because I think your students will, by and large, surprise you with what they're able to pick up.
Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Does anybody wish to add anything to the conversation at this point? Okay.
I think, sorry, Lena Kuzi has her hand up.
Ah, Lena.
From the NCBI in Dublin.
Yes. Lena, welcome.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I just wanted to add, Roger, to the Braille reading scheme, that both in Ireland and the UK, we started a couple of years ago with the Lego Braille bricks, learning through play, learning Braille through play, and we have rolled this out to a number of schools and students across Ireland, and I know in the UK that the same thing is happening over there as well, whereby children that are learning Braille, any child from the age of 4 to 16 that's learning Braille will get a kit, a Braille Lego Braille kit, and it's free of charge, and it teaches the basics of Braille. So your uncontracted Braille, grade 1 Braille, letter by letter, creating words, learning the alphabet, learning numbers. It's a fantastic thing and very well appreciated here in Ireland. And I know that Lego are running this all over the world actually now in a variety of different languages as well. And I know that recently they've rolled it out in China, and they're going to roll it out in the Arabic language as well, in Saudi Arabia, I believe. So it's very well appreciated across the globe, and it's just an added thing just to keep in mind when we're talking about Braille schemes, that the Lego Foundation has been ahead of many organisations and helping us with this project.
Lena, thank you for the point. Some of the audio may have been a bit tricky to hear, but I hope we've managed to get the gist of what you have, were wanting to contribute, and thank you very much indeed for doing that. So finally, is it our observation that provision of university material, is this a general issue, do we believe, or is it something that needs more promotion? Is it something that needs better, addressing better by raising awareness at that kind of level? Does anybody have anything they can add to this part of the conversation?
Sorry, Roger, can I come in on this as well? Because part of the work that we're doing here in Ireland with Bookshare Ireland is the rolling out of content for students in further and higher education. The platform itself, Bookshare Ireland, now holds over 1 million titles in a variety of accessible formats. Many of the books are academic books, so they're books used by students in further and higher education. And the student has a choice when they select the book for their course or the books from their curriculum that they need, that they have a choice of 4 or 5 different formats. One of them would be BRF, which is a Braille Ready file. This has been very successful in Ireland, and we started actually at the end of 2019. I know the RNIB in the UK have a similar platform, and we share many of our books with international organisations. So we have links with Canada, we have links with Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the UK, of course. And we share our titles, and that's why we have such a wealthy and rich and valuable collection made available to our students in further and higher education. And maybe it's something that should be noted as well, that a lot of work has been done in this area, and it's not a static system. Bookshare Ireland or any of the Bookshare platforms, it's continuously growing and developing. It's not a static collection by far. It's growing daily by thousands and thousands of books that are being put onto the service and put onto the system.
Yeah, very, very many thanks for making that point. And as you alluded to, there is Bookshare from the RNIB, and there's also a lot of work being done by publishers as well. Print publishers making material available electronically. So I'm wondering whether it's in no way wishing to minimize the issue that was clearly experienced by people about this provision, but maybe it's a combination of more publicity, letting people know what resources are available, how to access them, and maybe that's something that can be a takeaway from this particular conference.
I think that's right. Since I started the conversation, perhaps I ought to come in and respond to some of that. I do think that's right, and the point about Bookshare is a very valid one. Certainly over in the UK, Bookshare is available, RNIB Bookshare is available to all educational establishments, so that's schools, obviously. But I think even adults who are listening to this who might be thinking, well, I can't get access to Bookshare because I'm not at school. Actually, if you're at a college or a university, even studying a distance learning course, you'd be able to get access to RNIB Bookshare through the college or through the university. So it is an absolutely incredible resource.
Yeah.
I think the only thing to be careful about when we're talking about teaching Braille is things like, I mean, having said all I said about contractions, and I do actually stand by it, the beauty of something like Takeoff was that it would introduce contractions in a very methodical order, in a very methodical way that was compatible with the national curriculum of the time. So you could run a Braille lesson entirely in parallel with the national curriculum and it would make sense. And that, I think, is what has been lost slightly, is that, yes, we don't have a Braille specific resource that deals with split digraphs and things like that, which means that the teaching of Braille has become very separate from the teaching of literacy, whereas about 20 years ago, the teaching of Braille was integral to the teaching of literacy. And I think use of mainstream resources is a very good idea. I do think it would be very good if there was some research done into whether we can bridge that gap a little bit to make it a bit more holistic.
Matthew, thank you very much indeed. I think we are approaching the time when we need to draw this session to a close. So in doing so, I'd like to thank my fellow panel members and everybody, you, the audience particularly, and for everybody who's been here today, to Sight and Sound Technology and the Brailleist Foundation for your generous invitation to me to lead this particular session. But finally, all of us here are ambassadors for Braille, and by our actions, we can ensure it has a continuing important place in the world for future generations. There will be points from this event to take forward and further develop. The casual conversations we have with others about Braille all help because we know the journey is never complete. Let us make sure we seize the moment, whatever that is for each of us. I believe this is what Louis Braille would be encouraging us to do. Thank you, and over to Stuart.
Thank you, Roger. You are the consummate professional as always, and you have chaired the last hour absolutely expertly. So thank you so much for doing so. That's just about where our conference ends for today. I can't believe the time has flown so much, and we have thoroughly enjoyed the session. There's been so much discussion on chat. I see a lot of people answering questions and people pointing people to websites. So I think to just watch the peer support has been really interesting for me as well. I want to just say a few really quick thank yous. First of all, to everybody for attending today and for staying with us, whether you joined first thing or you came a little later or you dropped in and out. Thank you for making any time in your day to join our 6 Dots to Success. To our workshop leaders this morning, to Mel, George, and Mel, George, and Laurent, thank you so much for your assistance and your help. We could not have done this without you. And to Roger Firman, the chair with the most, we thank you again, Roger, for your expertise today. To Peter White, our keynote, who had to dash away, but he left us with some great thoughts, and what a way to start our conference. And to our friends at the Braillists Foundation, to Matthew Horspool, Paul Sullivan, and of course to the chair of the Braillists Foundation, Dave Williams. Thank you so much. To Matthew and Paul in particular, because we've been working on this project for the last while, and they've just been great to work with, and I really hope it's going to happen again in the future. And finally, and last but not by no means least, to my own colleagues, to Fanula Murphy and Sharon Lyons, who've been outstanding here today and who I could not have worked without. Fanula has been part of this project from day one and has done a huge amount of work behind the scenes to make it all happen. So Fanula, thank you sincerely. Sharon was drafted in at the last minute when our colleague Ruth Gallagher-Carr moved on from the company, and Sharon had the unenviable task this morning of creating loads of breakout rooms and managing lots of people. So Sharon, thank you very much for your help, and to our CEO Glenn Tukey for his support. Stay in touch with us. Braillists.org is the website of the Braillists Foundation, and sightandsound.co is where you'll find us. Braille's Foundation have an event on this evening at 7:30, I believe. Matthew, if you want to shout it out in case I didn't get the time right, but I think it's going to be an interesting one.
For sure, it's actually at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock p.m. The Braille technology throughout the ages, and yes, by all means, find that information right on the homepage there at braillists.org.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe and stay well. Happy New Year. Happy World Braille Day. I think we're all going to go and get something to eat at this stage, but enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your Braille Day. And thank you to all the lovely messages that are coming up on the chat at the moment. It's much appreciated. Take care, everybody, and we will talk to you again.